Hello and welcome to the Sunday Guardian podcast by Joyeeta Basu. At a time when there is so much happening in the Middle East or West Asia as we call it in India, I have a very special guest to discuss about not just I would say the Israel, Hezbollah, Gaza situation and also of course Iran, but of course what we have witnessed just now, the downfall of the Assad regime in Syria. What is the future of the region? What exactly will happen? Say, for example, is there any prospect of the revival of that Abraham Accords? If you remember, when Mr. Trump was president, he had got these countries on board to have peace with Israel. And it has been totally now, frankly, destroyed because of the Hamas attack and whatever has been happening over the last 1 year. Now, to discuss all this, I have a very special guest, Jason Isaacson, who is Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer with American Jewish Committee. I'm told that he has been visiting India regularly, and he has just come to India. And today I'm going to ask Jason about what exactly is going on in the Middle East. Thank you, Jason, for being here on the show.
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you, Joyeeta.
Jason, I'm told that you were very much involved in the Abraham Accord. What exactly do you think? Does it have a future after October 7, 2023? What happened ever since? Is it going to be difficult to revive it?
The Abraham Accords certainly have a future, and in fact, they have a present. They have not been destroyed, but they have been put on hold to a large degree. You're right. I've just come to India from being in the UAE and Bahrain, the two countries that in September of 2020 signed these agreements to normalize political relations with Israel. A development that was really of historic proportions, and that opened the door to economic activity, a great deal of tourism, investments, and laid the groundwork for an even wider expansion of a circle of Arab-Israeli peace. Quite significant. And of course, was followed a few months later by the normalization of relations between Israel and the Kingdom of Morocco, where I'll be in a few days as well. But the fact is that the leaders of these countries are as committed now as they were then to the development of a relationship with Israel, because they know it's in the interest of their people, of their societies, to have these relations for a range of reasons, security being one of them, but economic interaction in many sectors. Just as the relationship between India and Israel has taken off like a rocket for the last 3 decades, the relationship between Israel and Bahrain, between Israel and the UAE, between Israel and Morocco, also on an upward trajectory, but a trajectory that's been stalled because of what happened on October 7th, and then Israel's necessary reaction to these existential threats that was occasioned by the October 7th attacks. So in that case, because of the terrible scenes that we're seeing on TV every day from Gaza, because of the need that Israel has to basically destroy these threats that have been facing its people for so many years, it has been very difficult for the public to support the kind of growth of these relationships. But the governments are committed to getting back on that track. And I expect that with the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, and with the possibility, I think the increasing possibility, that sometime in the coming weeks or months there will be also an end to active hostility in Gaza, that there will be definitely a push to restart in a very aggressive way these Abraham Accords relationships, and then to go beyond the countries that are now in this circle of peace. Obviously, a large target here is Saudi Arabia. There have been many discussions between the U.S. administration and the Saudi kingdom, but also between Israelis and Saudis. And AJC has been part of this process as well for several years. And I expect that in time, because the logic is there, it is important for both of these countries to have that relationship. And we'll get there, but it's going to take some time.
So when you're talking about, the ceasefire with Hezbollah, or there is going to be a positive outcome perhaps in the operation in Gaza. Perhaps the Hamas leadership and cadre has largely been eliminated. But when we are looking at the Hezbollah, Is the ceasefire actually holding? Because there are, I mean, still skirmishes are going on, missiles are being used and all. How positive are you about the prospect of quote unquote peace in this particular situation?
Excellent question. I mean, I think you have to have a sort of flexible definition of ceasefire because it's not a ceasefire in the strictest sense of the term. There is certainly a diminishing level of activity, of military activity on both sides. Fewer missiles, fewer Israeli responses, fewer Israeli efforts to eliminate missile launchers and Hezbollah commanders. But it's not completely all quiet on the northern front of Israel. But it's much better than where it was, and it leads people to at least be able to say, we can start thinking about the day after. We can start thinking about returning to our homes in the north. A little more has to be done, but it's better now than it was a month ago, and I expect it'll continue to go in that direction. It's in the interest of both parties, frankly. And certainly, if we have any interest at all in restoring some kind of sanity and stability to Lebanon, self-governance in Lebanon, instead of being in the grip of an Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, it is necessary for a ceasefire to not only hold, but to allow for real security for the people of Lebanon and real security for the people of Israel.
You mentioned the I word, of course, Iran.
Yeah.
So the thing is that I think that is the biggest problem in that particular region. And especially when you are looking, say, for example, I'm being told that now that Syria, I mean, Assad is gone, Iran will hasten its move towards going full nuclear.
Well, there's a lot of speculation about that, about how Iran reacts to the fact that its proxies are being cut down to size to some degree. Not all, of course. I mean, there is still a Hezbollah command structure, even though it's been mostly decapitated, but not completely decapitated, and they still have many thousands of missiles, if not 150,000, as they did before the start of these intense hostilities. Hamas is not completely destroyed, but severely weakened. But there are still Iraqi and Syrian militias, although now, where are these Syrian militias who have been associated with the IRGC? It's not clear. The fall of Assad changes things significantly, and we're still trying to sort that out. This news is very fresh. And as you know, the rebel factions that took over Damascus and ousted Assad are from a variety of sources, a variety of backgrounds, of identifications, of theologies, of political orientations, of national identities. There's a Turkish involvement in this. There's an Islamist involvement, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Some people say that maybe the lead faction isn't really as divorced from its Al-Qaeda roots as it pretends to. So we're still trying to sort all this out. But what is clear is that Iranian influence is less of a threat than it was, but still a threat. And of course, as you say, there is the nuclear program that Iran has not backed off from. In fact, quite the opposite. It has increased dramatically its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. I was in a conference the other day in which the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency was talking about the still quite present threat of the Iranian nuclear program. It's not clear how close they have come to weaponization, but they certainly have a stockpile of highly enriched uranium that could, in very short order, fuel half a dozen nuclear warheads if they were able to fashion them into warheads. So that threat exists and will be very much on the agenda of the incoming Trump administration in a matter of weeks, because it is an existential threat to Israel if Iran has nuclear weapons, and not only Israel, to the states of the Arabian Gulf, states that want progress, that want peace, that want regional integration for Israel, and that want to develop their own societies in ways without having to worry about the cloud of a nuclear threat hanging over them from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So if Israel decides to escalate its conflict, I mean, quote-unquote conflict against Iran, what kind of support, if at all, will be coming from the Arab world? And of course, the US, we know.
Okay, well, let's of course face the fact that it's not Israel that is attacking Iran. Iran has tried to strangle Israel and has set militias and proxy armies of various kinds against Israel for years. It has been a call in the streets of Tehran since the Islamic Republic to have death to Israel. So it is Iran that has been threatening Israel. Israel is responding to these threats as any country would when posed by that kind of threat. It's not clear how this is going to shake out. The fact that Iran launched direct missile attacks on Israel on the night of April 13th. Most of those missiles were, of course, knocked out of the sky by world-class air defenses that Israel has, assisted by the United States and other countries, including Arab countries with which Israel has relationships. And then attacked again on October 1st, again with a very significant air defense response by Israel. But Iran has now altogether launched hundreds of missiles at Israel and drones, not something that can be taken lightly. Israel has every right to respond directly, forcefully to these quite blunt and brutal attacks. How it will all turn out is not entirely clear to me. Israel has, in this latest round, very significantly degraded Iran's air defense capabilities. And now with that somewhat weakened posture by Iran, combined with the fact that the Hezbollah threat to Israel has been severely degraded, the Hamas threat has been weakened. Houthis are still out there and every now and then fire a missile or a drone into Israeli airspace, and sometimes to fatal effect. Militias are still active, and of course there are still weapons that are being smuggled through Jordan into the West Bank of Israel, and rather the West Bank, and are attacking Israelis as well. There are still threats on multiple fronts, but the posture has changed. Does that drive Iran to think that maybe what they need to do is double down on their nuclear program, which is, I think, the beginning of your question? It's very possible. It's also possible that Iran will think twice and will say that we have a very determined foe in Israel, a very capable foe, backed by the United States fully, and I expect that backing to be only more evident with President Trump when he takes office on January 20th. So it could very well be that the Iranians will think twice about advancing further their nuclear program. The world is watching very carefully what Iran does. I know that India is watching carefully what Iran does, because that kind of threat to global security affects this country as much as any. And I'm hopeful that cooler heads will prevail in Tehran. The world cannot tolerate that continued threat to global security, and I'm expecting, whether it'll be increasing sanctions imposed by the United States, I think in concert with European powers, because there is declining tolerance in Europe as well for not only the Iranian nuclear program, but frankly, Iranian assassination attempts and kidnappings on European soil. I think people are fed up and are looking forward to a time when Iran is basically behaving like a normal country instead of this aggressive revolutionary power.
Yeah. So you think the Arab world is going to be okay with whatever Iran against Iran?
An Arab world that has countries that Iran regularly attacks through its proxies or directly. You'll remember the attack on the Saudi Aramco facilities several years ago under the Trump administration. The attacks by Iranian proxies on shipping in the Red Sea. The killing of guest workers in the UAE, I believe Indian guest workers. And attacks on Bahrainis as well. And the fact that from an Iranian propaganda perspective, Bahrain is a province of Iran. There are so many offenses that Iran commits against the Arabian Gulf, against the Arabian Gulf countries, that I think that they don't want war, they don't want to be caught in the crossfire, but they don't want an aggressive, hegemonic Iran continuing on the path that it's been on since the revolution of '79.
Has the fall of Assad helped Israel in any way?
It's unclear, and I think this will have to be sorted out over the coming days. We clearly, Assad was not a great neighbor to Israel, but would an Islamist-backed rebel force with the support of Turkish government, whose president has been quite aggressive in his rhetoric against Israel, incredibly hostile, with roots in these rebel forces in Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Is that a good neighbor for Israel? So far, I think we're waiting to see. Neither side was a good neighbor, at least with Assad in control. Although, of course, that also gave an open door to Iranian influence and the IRGC setting up bases and occasionally launching drones and missiles into Israel. But the Syrian army itself was not directly opposing Israel, not, of course, since their defeat in the 1970s. It's hard to know who to root for. It's hard to root for a rebel force that has the background that this rebel force does. I say force; it's a multiple forces in coalition that toppled Assad. Israel is on guard. They have to be on guard. There have already been, as you know, efforts on the part of the IDF to protect the UN positions in the Golan Heights. And I expect that there will be a very continuous deployment of Israeli forces on their border, just unsure the direction that that Syria is going to take, and the world is watching.
When you look back, I mean, October 7th to 2023 was some sort of an inflection point. Now, the thing is, would you say, because I was in Israel and I saw the kind of horror the Israelis have faced, but why is it that there was not so much sympathy? I mean, that is, as an observer, that is what I felt. The world is now willing to talk more about the Palestinians. They're talking about genocide. We see what is going on, the South Africa, that International Court of Justice and all these things that are going on. Do you think the world has turned a blind eye to, perhaps even deliberately, to what Israel faced?
In a word, yes. And it's not an unfamiliar syndrome. Israel has been harshly judged through one-sided declarations in UN General Assemblies for decades, through Human Rights Council condemnations over decades. What happened in the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice over the last year is a travesty of justice and a judgment that Israel does not deserve. Israel is fighting the kind of existential battle that any country similarly attacked would fight, only probably with greater care than most armies. And we've had military experts who have talked about that. The fact that 1,200 people were slaughtered on October 7th, 2023, in a country of, 8 million people, 9 million people? Where basically everybody knows somebody who was killed or captured. 251 hostages taken by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. The trauma that you saw when you were in Israel, because I think you were there a few months after October 7th, and I've been there several times since October 7th, is so vivid, so vital, so ongoing. And the fact that it's not just in Gaza, but the fact that on October 8th, the day after the attacks of October 7th, Hezbollah started launching dozens and then hundreds of rockets into Israel, killing Israeli civilians and soldiers as well, Arabs and Jews, both victims of this ongoing attack on the fabric of Israel. The country wants to be able to live in peace with its neighbors, but they've been attacked on 7 fronts, from the militias in Iraq and Syria, from within the borders of the West Bank, and from Hamas and Hezbollah, and from the Houthis. I think what we will hope to see in the coming months with the ceasefire in Lebanon as it continues to hold, as it holds more firmly, frankly, than it has been in the first days, and with the possibility of a hostage release and ceasefire deal in Gaza, which I know the Egyptians are working on with Qataris, with the United States, and I'm sure President-elect Trump, who issued a very stern warning to Hamas the other day, and I'm sure will back that up when he takes office as well, that there'll be some movement on that front as well. If we see the release of hostages, we see a ceasefire, we see a beginning of a new governance structure in Gaza in which Hamas is no longer the controlling authority, but there is a civil authority that's composed of Palestinians, perhaps with Arab states intervening as well, as we've heard from some in the region that they'd like to take a part in that. We can start building toward a different reality for the people of Gaza, for the people of the West Bank, and for, frankly, the people of Israel. And I'm sure that will lead into the possibility of a political path toward a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're still years away from, I think, the conclusion of that possibility, but that's the path that we have to be on if we're going to have any kind of enduring peace.
Yeah, because when we are looking at the situation, it's also about people to people, but it seems people in Gaza, there's a lot of animosity towards Israel, in fact. So how will that, and especially after the war operation that's still going on, how do you think that bridge can be, that gap can be?
That's hard. I mean, it's clear that there has to be a sense of a political future, political horizon, of the possibility of economic opportunity. I mean, frankly, Gaza has been a welfare-dependent entity for decades. It should have a thriving economy, and there's no reason why it cannot. Why with agriculture there were greenhouses that you recall Hamas destroyed when they took over the territory from Israel when Israel withdrew. There has to be a different way to create a future that is sustainable for the people of that region. And yes, as you said earlier, international focus on the destruction in Gaza, in which Israel had no choice in fighting Hamas terrorists who were embedded in civilian infrastructure, under houses, under mosques, under hospitals, under schools, has resulted in civilian casualties, because that was frankly Hamas's strategy, to hide among the civilians and to attack from within those civilian infrastructures. And then when Israel responds, as any army would, it meant the killing of civilians, which served the propaganda purposes of Hamas, lowering Israel's international reputation, which was entirely their strategy. I'm grateful that some countries, some wise leaders around the world, Prime Minister Modi being maybe first among them, recognize this cynical strategy by Hamas and recognize that Israel is fighting a just war with the most incredibly difficult circumstances that it faces, but is fighting a war that it has to win. And frankly, it's not said so publicly, but I've spent a lot of time with Arab officials over the last 15 months, and one hears privately an agreement that Israel has to defeat Hamas, has to defeat the forces that want to halt the progress that has been made in recent years to expand Arab-Israeli peace, want to basically that Israel has no choice but to push back against the Iranian efforts to halt Arab-Israeli peace.
What about the rise of anti-Semitism in the West, particularly what we have witnessed on university campuses, and now that Mr. Trump is becoming president? Do you think there will be a reversal of the trend that we have been witnessing? It's unbelievable that what we see sometimes.
It is unbelievable. And look, let's also say under President Biden, there has been a very strong push on the part of the administration to confront the surge of anti-Semitism that we've seen in the United States. There was a national strategy against anti-Semitism that was drawn up by the White House with, frankly, in consultation with my organization, the American Jewish Committee, and the help of others in civil society as well. And they have taken important actions. President Trump, as he was in his first term, I know will be as committed to the fight against anti-Semitism as this current administration. He's made that quite clear. So I expect that there will be continued efforts on the national front and the international front. You know, there's a U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, whose term will now be ending at the end of this current administration. I'm sure there'll be a new, very strong, very eloquent appointee to replace her. because she's been phenomenal. I was just with her in Bahrain at a conference, and she's, I know, traveling around the Arab world, and also I think she's been in 30 countries to push back against the surge of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has many roots. I think the war in Gaza has been an accelerant, but the problem has existed for, well, as you know, millennia. It's hardly a new phenomenon. But yes, what we have seen on college campuses over the last year, this complete misunderstanding of, frankly, of the necessity of Israel's fight against terror, but also it's gone well beyond just the question about what's happening in the Middle East to you have not only on university and college campuses, but also there are publishing houses that are not publishing Jewish authors because, for quite unclear reasons, maybe because they might be seen as friendly to Israel, which is the most abominable association. I mean, the fact is that Jews were indigenous to the land of Israel for thousands of years. We should not be the only people who do not have a right to have a country in our native land. Somehow that gets lost in this kind of weird, kind of far left interpretation of Israel as a colonial power. Not a colonial power. There have been Jews there since, before the beginning of time, practically. The land has to be shared. And the majority of Israelis have long supported the notion of having to share that land. There's a great deal of misinterpretation of Jews, of Israel, a lot of conspiracy theories that have been floating around for many years, all coming together and fueled, I think, as I said, an accelerant has been the images that people are seeing of the destruction in Gaza. But people have to stop and think what's really happening. A small country wants to live in peace with its neighbors, attacked by its neighbors since its founding in 1948 as a modern state, and is fighting for its survival and to frankly liberate the hostages that have been taken and have been cruelly held for more than 14 months. I would like to see more individuals and leaders following the example of Prime Minister Modi and others in India who recognize the realities that Israel faces. India itself, a country that has known terror and has fought terror. I would hope that lesson is learned by more people in my country and more people around the world, recognizing that Israel's Jews have a right to a state that will be shared with the native Palestinian population, but a state that is viable and secure. And has no choice but to fight the terrorists that have been trying to destroy it since its founding.
Well, here, of course, since you're an American, if I can ask you about India-American relations, because, there have been things not been going very well for the last maybe a couple of years or something like that under Mr. Biden. Do you think things will improve under Mr. Trump? Because our ruling party came out, I think, 2 days back, accusing the State Department, they named the State Department in particular, and said that you have been trying to destabilize our government. So which way are India-US relations headed? And of course there is India-Israel relations. But, that I think a little more settled than what exactly we are witnessing on the India-US front.
You're obviously following it in ways that I'm not, and more closely than I am, and so I welcome your assessment of the friction in the relationship. From maybe a different vantage point, where I'm based in Washington, I see less friction. I see more bipartisan support for the relationship between India and the United States, more bipartisan appreciation of the benefits to the United States of this relationship, not only because there are millions of Indian Americans who are enormously significant contributors to the American economy and American culture, American society, very high levels of business and increasingly in politics as well on Capitol Hill. I was just at a wonderful Diwali celebration in one of the congressional office buildings with a huge cross-section, bipartisan support, House and Senate members of both parties. And frankly also some diplomats from a number of countries who joined me and some of my colleagues as well. I see less friction. I see more positive signs in that relationship. Do I expect the relationship to grow even faster, higher, stronger under President Trump? Yeah, I do. I think that there's clearly an affinity between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, but it's at many levels. It's not just at the summit level that you see an identification of the same kinds of goals, the same values, the same necessity to fight against terrorist forces, against a large country in this region that has ambitions that run counter to the strategic interests of India as well as the United States. I think there will be a continued joining of forces against disruptive elements internationally. And I think a growth in the economic relationship between the United States and India, based on, again, common interests, common values, and supported strongly by the Indian American community and, frankly, by the Jewish American community as well. We work very closely with our fellow Americans who have the same interest in strengthening the ties between the United States and this wonderful country.
Yeah, and the last question is, of course, we are going to talk about India and Israel. What is exactly the feedback from the Jewish community in America, and of course Israel, of course, when India goes and votes against Israel in certain, General Assembly and all the resolutions and all? Because at one level we are friends, very good friends and partners in terms of security and all, but there are times when India goes against Israel. What is the general feeling about that?
I think between mature democracies there can be differences of opinion on international subjects, but I have no doubt that people who matter in the state of Israel, the leadership, frankly civil society leaders in addition to government officials, people in think tanks, people in the military, people in the intelligence community, people across a wide range of businesses, recognize the enormous benefits of this relationship and have no doubt about where Indian values are and where Indian policies are. And they are strongly supportive of the India-Israel relationship, its continued upward trajectory. I remember the very beginning of that relationship in 1992, and started visiting in this country reasonably around that time, and have seen the spread of the benefits of this relationship, not only billions of dollars in trade every year, the Israeli centers of excellence around the country to provide agricultural technologies to Indian farmers, increasing involvement in the various high-tech sectors, medtech and cybersecurity and other sectors as well. The votes in the United Nations General Assembly, in which the international community wags its finger at Israel and blames it for various things without really understanding the situation that Israel finds itself in, are part of the normal conversation in the international community. There are certain things that matter a great deal, certain things that matter a great deal less, and I think there are wise Israelis who recognize the differences and appreciate quite significantly the steps that India, I should say, has taken to strengthen this relationship consistently again and again, year after year.
So India-Israel relations are on track, and as you say, India-US relations are also on track.
And we are very much committed to keeping it that way.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jason, so much for this enlightening discussion.
Thank you. Pleasure being with you.
Yeah. So, thank you, viewers, for watching. Until the next time.